I'm Eric Pradham. Welcome to the Unfolding Thought Podcast, the show for leaders and deep thinkers who demand more than the usual fluff. If you're the kind of person who moves on from a book, video, or podcast the moment it stops making you think or introducing you to something you can use, I hope you'll feel right at home here. In each episode, we uncover the deeper, often overlooked forces that shape our thoughts and behaviors so you can see yourself, your team, and the world from a whole new angle, and then actually apply what you learn to grow and do better. On the Unfolding Thought Podcast, we aim for minimal filler and maximum insight, challenging assumptions and sparking new thinking every step of the way. Are you ready to dive deeper? Then let's get started. Have you ever found yourself right in the middle of a real public emergency, having to take action immediately to ensure it does not impact even more people? Or how about dealing with an online firestorm, all started because of a lie? Today, I'm speaking with Mandy Hoskinson, founder of digital marketing agency Zolay, president of Social Media Club Los Angeles, and vice president of Social Media Club Global. Not only has she dealt with tense and difficult situations like these, but also she's had a major influence on building brands and movements that have major economic and other impacts on communities, such as helping to land the Los Angeles 2028 Olympics. Mandy and I talk not just about her work, but also her philosophy on and approach to social media, digital marketing, and effective communications generally. Listening back on this conversation, I'm struck by how much value is packed into a conversation with Mandy, and I hope you will be too. And now, I bring you Mandy Hoskinson. Mandy, thank you for joining me. Would you mind telling me a little bit about your background?
Sure. I am a military kid who settled in Los Angeles about 15 years ago. Went to UCLA, got into marketing. My first kind of brand that I worked on was actually UCLA. I was with one of their first UCLA social media hires. Got to work on that brand. From there, I got to work with the bid to win the Olympics for Los Angeles, which we won. Box, went back to UCLA, worked at CBS, and then started my own agency about 7 years ago.
When you went to work for UCLA, or I suppose let me back up. What did you study when you were in college?
Yeah, I studied world arts and cultures, which is a very funny, almost hidden department at UCLA. I kind of call it an art and anthropology degree. So it's a subset of the dance degree, which is bonkers. But I actually started as a music major. That's a long story, but I knew I wanted to do something like international development. Went to that degree, and I was studying Swahili because I was really interested in like HIV/AIDS work. Worked in Tanzania for a summer, came back and asked the department if I could use my work in Tanzania as my mandatory study abroad credit, and they did not let me do it. They said I had to go to Paris or Shanghai, and I said, but I'm studying Swahili. And they said, it doesn't matter. And so I found a major that worked with the work that I wanted to do, which was global health. And through that is I found that a good place for me was actually communicating about the global health organizations that I was involved with. And that sort of led to my communications career.
Okay. So then when you went to, I think it was work for UCLA, you already had some interest in or some experience with communications, I guess. And how did you come upon this role or get into this role at UCLA?
Yeah, it's funny. So when I was getting into social, it wasn't quite called social media yet. It wasn't, right? And I had web assistant jobs on campus. So I had a web assistant job for housing, and that was a mixture of photography, videography, and Facebook and the website, like just kind of that like web media role. And even before that, in high school, I had volunteered for an environmental festival, and they needed more volunteers and more attendees. And I pitched putting it on Facebook.com. I was like, what if we put it on this place? Like, it's cool. They just launched this events feature, and they were like, okay, kid, like whatever, that's your job. You asked for it. And so I did. And it was like one of our strongest years yet. And that had given me the inkling all the way years prior that I was sort of onto something. I got the web assistant job. I found another nonprofit on campus that was doing really cool work. I asked them if they had thought about putting their stuff on Facebook, and they said, we have thought about it. She actually said, "Are you an angel that dropped from heaven?" And so I landed that internship I invented for myself. And so by the time this other web assistant job showed up, I already had work experience. And I actually just spoke at a panel for UCLA students last night. And one of the things that came up then was, even if you don't have a ton of work experience, having an opinion, I think, really matters. And I came in with an opinion. I really liked what UCLA was doing on Foursquare. Remember Foursquare?
Oh, yeah.
And so I said, like, oh, yeah, I've been following what UCLA is doing on Foursquare and Tumblr. And, at the time, that was like a pretty surprising, like, involved thing to be doing, because this was their first ever team. They really hadn't invested a lot into it yet. So, yeah, I had a bit of that work experience prior.
Okay, thank you. And, I'm filling in the gaps for myself a little bit here, but it sounds like your experience getting into a career in marketing was somewhat similar to mine, in that you had an interest in a certain space, channels, however it is that we want to characterize it. And then you were lucky enough to talk to the right people or have the right opportunities, but that you had also, in addition to some interest or some curiosity, you had a little bit of an entrepreneurial drive, in that you were likely going to go into these channels or these spaces and try things out. And you were kind of lucky enough to be able to do that as part of your career, or the beginning of your career, if I'm hearing you correctly.
Totally. Yeah, totally. I think, I think anybody who does any sort of tech futurism, marketing futurism work is a little entrepreneurial. They're a little risk taking. And then there is an immense amount of luck in every step of that journey. Yeah, there's so much behind it of being in the right place at the right time, but then also having the interest and having pursued things to a certain degree before that opportunity popped up.
So you did have some jobs. You were working for other people, and in some cases within, I think, some fairly large organizations, whether it was UCLA, I think you said Fox at one point, but you did go out and start your own business. I'm guessing, at least early on, you were a one-person shop, and you've grown from there. About how long have you been running your own business?
Yeah, we started in 2018, and really, I was leaving CBS. I was social media for primetime dramas. I had 12 show assignments, and then also was on the CBS All Access team, now Paramount Plus, and I was on the CBS main brand team. So by the time I left, I had 19 assignments, which is a lot of accounts to run. And yeah, I definitely wanted a social media break, and I loved photography. And so I sort of leaned into the photo side of my work, while also keeping websites and social as an available service. I had been freelancing. I think this is the story of so many agency owners, is that people keep knocking on your door enough that you just end up starting your own thing. There's a lot. There's more to that story, but it was the right time to leave CBS, and is like a very famous time when a lot of women left CBS, and I'll leave it at that. And started my own company. Yeah, started small. Photography did really well, and so I had found that I didn't love working at home all the time, something that people would soon discover themselves, and that I would really like an office. And I was doing photo shoots in my living room and like kicking my husband out so I could do them. And I live in a 1-bedroom apartment in LA, so that's like not a very convenient thing. And so I worked at people's homes, and I worked at other people's offices, and kept an eye out for an office for myself, and opened our official studio March 2020, a terrible, terrible time to sign a lease and open an office space. And yeah, and then struggled in 2020 But, I'm very involved in the social media community. As you know, it's how we know each other. And I've also just done social for a long time. And so luckily, people that needed social media help sort of came up. And so now 95% of our company, which has 12-ish team members, I would say, like, it's more like the equivalent of 4 full-timers, but that's the way social media works. People consult in like very niche services. So we have lots of service providers. Yeah. So now that's about 95% of our income, and photography is maybe 5%. So things have pivoted a bit.
So the 95% you said is social media, right? Okay.
Yeah. And maybe web at this point. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Actually, I'm glad that you mentioned that. Back in the earlier days of social media, Facebook.com, or pick whatever channel you want to pick, they were largely standalone. You kind of had to go to that place in order to engage with your friends or whoever was there, the content that was there, or the actions that you could take. Now, especially over the last, let's say 10 years or so, you've had a lot more e-commerce and advertising developed in the social media space. So with the social media work that you do, or the clients that you work with, do you end up tying in frequently to analytics and tracking, or advertising, or e-commerce, or any other things that maybe aren't quote unquote social media, but they're important to the businesses or the organizations you're working with?
Yeah, definitely. I think especially for folks like us who got in before, when that was just sort of an ancillary part of internet work, they weren't separate. And so I have come in with a holistic perspective because of when I started in this work. I think also just the way that I think in general, I always came in from an organizational perspective because that's sort of where I started. And then now, as someone who just really likes to provide high-level strategic work, I have had the practice of being embedded in other parts of these organizations and operations, but I also think it's incredibly important. I think one of the nerdier examples, but the thing that's really relevant this month, is CRMs, customer relationship management, right? The first time that I really got embedded in a CRM was when UCLA recruited me to come back. So I had been at the UCLA brand, and during that time, these cool guys were starting the first university crowdfunding platform. And UCLA was one of the first test universities to have its own platform. And so I had crossed paths with the person that had sort of taken up charge of that role and given him brand advice and templates and things like that about how to do marketing as a UCLA organization. And so when my Olympics work wrapped up, a job opened and I went back to work with him with crowdfunding. And we sat in the corporate foundation and research relations office, which, just like social media, like these sort of new technologies, they had to sit somewhere, like someone has to put the money down. And it's always fun to hear about how someone's role is different because of where their position is born or where the funding is coming from. So we had to be there bright and early, in California time anyway, in like full professional clothing, because these were people that were getting $50,000 checks, $500,000 checks, $1 million checks. Like that was their job. My job was to get $1 checks and to help students get them from other students and from alumni. But I was really embedded in their fundraising technology, in their CRM. And I got to see how high-level fundraising happened because that was the office that we were in. And we had to, the way that this office had data and performance metrics was CRM work. And so I was also part of a program that helped people track donors on social media because I was catching their donors talking smack about departments that they gave to online. And I would tell their fundraiser, like, hey, I saw your donor say something online. Do you follow them on Twitter? Like, have you looked at what they have to say? And so I helped sort of these high-level fundraisers find access to social media tracking and analytics for their donors. And then on the other end, started to incorporate these like very small level donations that hadn't really been tracked into a software. So from that experience, I have done some sort of CRM work for pretty much every single brand I work with, even if it's just me doing it myself. And every time I do it, a year later, somebody says, "Do you have data on X?" And I go, "Yes," because I had built it in. It might seem like a strange example, but like the sort of like data tracking analytics, I think is a good example of a connection of like the bigger picture rather than just tweeting, because we're doing so much more than that. And if you know what the organizational goal is and how they track their own progress, social media can go so much further. And that's the sort of holistic consulting that we provide our clients. It's such a hard story to tell. It's like, hey, we actually know the bigger picture of, to your point, ads, analytics, e-commerce, CRM, organizational management, like volunteer management. Like we bring a bigger picture understanding, but proving that in web copy is hard. But it is what we're doing. I have 2 CRM meetings after this call today, so it's what we're doing real time.
Well, in my career, when I got heavily involved with CRM-level data, that was when I was working primarily with nonprofits in fundraising. And I had gone from more broadcast-like marketing, awareness level stuff, and then also just social listening type data in social media. And then to see, no, we're really looking at an individual or a pool of people, and we're looking at average lifetime value, or how many direct mail pieces or emails or whatever it is do we have to send in order to get a certain return, and then cross-channel as well. I'm sure over time you have been involved in things like your clients are hitting people in some non-social media channel, and then you are activating either the owned social media, or perhaps, I don't know if you get involved in social media advertising, but then there are questions of like, well, what's the return if we hit a household or an individual with 2 channels versus 1? And so when I got exposed to CRM level data, then I felt like it was just so much easier to put together a hypothesis and then measure whether or not our hypothesis played out in the real world.
100%. Yeah. We do advertising. I have an ideal cap where we'll cap out and we'll just work with another company, generally over 10,000 a month. There's different ways that we sort of manage that, but yeah, 100%. Getting that data, actually thinking it through, having good databases, good reporting, it makes a big difference. And it's what you would hope from a social media team and social media analytics. People don't always know how to shop, especially like as a vendor. There are some people who know absolutely a lot, and we have an easier time being able to share our value because, as you know, if someone understands what we're doing, like that we're doing that, right? That we have CRM level data about people, that we know that we've reached them in multiple ways, their work is going so much further. But all they hear is a number sometimes, and it's a journey to sort of communicate that value if they don't have the sort of working knowledge of what in-depth work looks like versus just getting a post up or getting an ad out,
Yeah, well, let me go back a little bit just real quick. So you mentioned that we know each other because of social media. You and I met each other because of Social Media Club. Now, so are there certain things that you're focused on at the moment, or what's going on, I suppose, with Social Media Club, at least as of today?
Sure. Yeah. So the spiel is Social Media Club is a 19-year-old going on 20-year-old nonprofit learning and networking organization that has had in the past 100 chapters around the world. And I joined about 12 years ago, I think 13 now, in LA. And LA was a pretty big community here too, where there would be learning and happy hours, workshops. And yeah, there's a lot of things have changed with professional organizations over time. And I think people's relationships to them has changed. Frankly, from a global perspective, I'm still getting involved, but my role with Social Media Club Global is that I'm the VP of operations globally, and I'm the chapter president in LA. You know, when you are trying to breathe life back into a community or, you know, a city that you're involved with doesn't have the momentum, or, you know, something like in Atlanta who's getting restarted is trying to sort of revive momentum. I have tried to look to the organization's heart and where it started. And the mission holds up. The mission that's on the site, I guess, is like 10, 15 years old. And I sat down with the executive director and we wanted to change like a single word, which is pretty cool. But it's basically, we get a bunch of people together to learn about this new technology, use it ethically, and support each other working with it. And when I looked at it, I realized it's actually a marketing futurism organization. And it took me a while to sort of put that together because Social Media Club was founded the year Twitter was founded and started when we were texting to tweet. And I was kind of trying to put together and you know, maybe in my future, there's a world of me meeting some of the original founders and sort of their heart of things. But when I was going to Social Media Club events is when there weren't social media managers yet. And it's kind of like AI. I always say if Social Media Club were to start in the past couple of years, it would be AI Club. Because it's really this, at the time, 19 years ago, social media was this like magical, futuristic vertical in technology, in communications. And so the members in LA that are longtime members, they're PR people, they're video people, they're journalists, they're photographers, they're actors. Like it was anybody interested in the future of this technology. And so as I recruit new members who are just coming in and they like, you know, especially our younger members are just coming in thinking about influencers. I'm trying to pair the people that have been in it for a long time who are tech futurists, in my opinion. And then there's this whole other world of sort of celebrity that's like a newer part of marketing. And do we honor the heart of the early learners who are there to learn about sort of like tech and communications, and or these newer folks that are, you know, connecting in a different way and like building audiences in a different way? And the answer is we want to honor everyone and we want to localize. Like we want to, for all of each chapter president that I mentor, I always just encourage pursuing what you're interested in and what's in your network, because that's, of course, what you're going to naturally do. And B, to provide what your city wants or needs. But I'm a tech nerd, so I always lean that way. And I get pushback from my board of we should be focusing on social media and everything that it entails. So what I'm up to right now is really just trying to empower cities with the tools that have worked for me and hopefully bonding between cities, which is absolutely happening, about what is working for them in their city as we navigate the future of social media, which is now a massive industry. But because it doesn't have the charm, the flash like AI does, we're now just another established industry, right? It's the Public Relations Society. It's the American Marketing Association. Like now we're just Social Media Club. We don't have that sparkle that AI kind of has for events right now. So I'm helping the organization on a global level figure out what it means to honor our earliest members and to venture into a new world. And the last thing I'll say is that my core thesis is that we build careers. That's where I come from, is people join the board because they're building. People come to our events because they're building or pivoting. Be it if they come to happy hours to network, if they come to panels to learn, if they speak on panels to grow their thought leadership, the people that feel settled and happy with where they are often aren't there. They're doing something, they're building, they're connecting. Like there are some people that do sort of reputation maintenance or learning maintenance, whatever, but oftentimes they're builders. And so for me, it's about identifying what our community needs in order to build their career and then creating those spaces or opportunities for them to do it.
I really appreciate that you're thinking about where is our audience, and who are we looking to serve? Because one of the things that I wanted to pick your brain about with regard to social media is I think that we all know that in any kind of communications, not just marketing, we need to understand our audience. We need to understand the goals, visions, dreams, whatever it is that they have, understand their context and all of that. But then also you see in social media that emotions and sort of psychological triggers become very important. So it's so easy to point to negative things, especially now with division and culture. And are there, in your opinion, often overlooked psychological triggers that push people to engage or to disengage on social media? And how does taking this into account impact how you advise your clients?
It's an ecosystem, right? So I think that's something that is important to always remember. You and I spoke about CRMs and people seeing a marketing message in multiple ways and multiple times, because as a holistic marketer, not just social media, but as a holistic marketing plan, the expectation of any sort of medium to large size campaign is that someone is being hit with this campaign, with this message in multiple ways from multiple places. And absolutely. So our company, we do multicultural marketing. And part of that stems from my work, having worked with brands that have worked in multiple countries. From my work, I speak Japanese, I speak Swahili, I speak French, like from me working in multiple countries around the world. And then from us being based in LA and having a diverse group of people who have done the same thing. They speak multiple languages, they work with people in multiple countries. And so there is a whole world of localizing marketing, right? And we've worked with a number of brands that have, high level localization teams. And there's a reason why, because there's a reason why movie posters are changed by each country, because there are, like you're mentioning, psychological triggers. Colors mean different things to different cultures. Words mean different things to different cultures. Especially right now in the US, there's a lot of words that are having their meanings rapidly change. And so it is something that we're doing with our clients where we're sitting down with them, and the conversation that we're having with people is, what is your actual message? And is this word that we're used to using going to communicate it anymore? Because at the end of the day, if the word iPhone becomes a cuss word tomorrow, you would rethink the way that you use it, because you would no longer be able to have a functioning conversation if it is suddenly now loaded with all of this meaning. And it's unfortunate because a lot of these words mean a lot to us and our clients. But there is even just a list of words recently that have now become something much harder to use. And it is something that we're talking to our clients about, where if you have work that you're trying to accomplish and a singular word will stop you from being able to accomplish that because it changed meaning to your audience, you have to be audience aware. So it's a hard conversation to have. And it's one that we've had in so many ways for a long time. And it's one that we consult on to this day. And it goes even bigger than that, right? And we see people much more aware of this now. Trends, right? Being trend aware. So lots of trends come with so much cultural baggage that people just don't fully understand. And we are often the naysayers. I guess a lot of times social media people have the reputation of being the ones who just want to jump on a trend no matter what. But because we've always come from this cultural perspective, because I came from brands like UCLA and the Olympics and CBS, like I've always been incredibly aware of brand reputation. We've always been a lot more intentional about the trends that we try to participate in. And we try to give clients context of, hey, this is the subtext of this trend, is something to be aware of. So it can be as small as a TikTok sound to as big of, a word that you use in your mission. We're definitely always trying to be aware of what our actual goal is, to your point, who the actual audience is and how they're going to receive it and if it will do the work that we're trying to accomplish.
Do you feel like for your business that that's something that differentiates you, is that you are more attuned to making sure that we're communicating the right thing or that we're working toward the right goal than maybe some other organizations? And I'm not trying to, make your business seem superior to others, right? But there are plenty of us, plenty of communications professionals that just don't take the time to ask the question of, is this the right message, the right audience, and so on? And do you feel like that's something that differentiates your business from others, perhaps?
Definitely. Yeah. There's quality over quantity, and different businesses need different work. There are, CPG brands, fashion brands that just need to get one post per SKU out, and just, every single product needs to be up on the feed. Whereas, we have clients like governments, organizations that service governments, organizations that service nations, organizations that service like complex categories like women in venture capital that need intentional writing and intentional research behind it. And the risk is much higher for an organization trying to prevent child marriage in India messing up a trend versus a leggings company jumping onto a trend a little too early because they don't actually know what it means. And these are heavy examples. We work with lots of types of clients, but it is what we're good at. And it comes from that institutional background of my own, and therefore my network, and therefore my team. And from that, our work, like now that we've been doing the work for so long, my team has a list of words that are easy to forget have a history. The word dumb has a history, right? Deaf and dumb, like the word lame has a history. We've worked with folks that like to call meetings powwows, and we've even been given copy that says that, right? And there are things that there are some communities absolutely take for granted. But then to your point, like getting into translations and color theory, and there's like a whole deeper level of localizing, but absolutely. And I because I love that work and having the time to take the time, that's who we tend to match well with. The people that just want to get something out are not always the best match for us for a number of reasons, but it is because QC, quality control for us, involves cultural interpretation and having someone else, generally someone who speaks another language, read your copy. And that sort of delay is not something everybody wants to put up with.
I think something that is implied in what we're saying is that there are a lot of leaders that underestimate how emotions can spread within online communities. And so I'm curious how you have seen, or how you might think about emotions spreading, and then how you think about an organization getting in hot water, and how you might generally advise clients to step back from an emotional contagion sort of situation.
Yeah, I have two examples. So I'm based in LA, and we just had a lot of fires, and there's a lot of ways, of course, that our community is engaging in it. And as a communicator, and as someone who really cares about institutional communications, and a resident of the city that was 1.8 miles from evacuating for 3 weeks, you're observing people do your work in the most important time of need, like literal life and death, and watching what does and doesn't go well. So I've been attending sort of postmortems a little bit of how things happened in terms of communications in the city. And then now we're in rebuilding, which is going to be, from an event I went to this week, about 12 years. And so with the estimate from the architects that I heard from this week, was that the soonest they'll break ground is probably 2 years from now. And so sort of really interesting time. And one of my first crises, because that's kind of what we're getting at, is at UCLA, I had been brought on as an assistant, and then my boss left and was suddenly sitting in sort of a vacuum as the manager, not the manager, but who else is the manager kind of thing. And I was sitting there in the afternoon, and a water main broke right in front of campus. And I was the only one in the office. So I realized like nobody was there. People didn't know, they were commuting, whatever. And so there was a possibility that people were going to die because it was a lot of water. It was on Sunset Boulevard, and there were cars trapped in the water. And I realized like I needed to call the fire department, and I needed to figure out, like, we didn't even know whose water it was because there was just a ton of water coming from Sunset Boulevard. And I personally did not know the water maintenance map of LA. And so there was a lot of chasing. And the interesting thing and the sort of emotions that I'm bringing up here, and one that absolutely mirrored during the fires, was whose fault is it? So everybody assumed it was UCLA's fault. It's the city's water. UCLA doesn't manage its own water system, but the community was just like, UCLA is going to kill people because it doesn't maintain its campus, right? That was the story. And here I am. It's my first brand account. I think I'm like 21 and just like freaking out. And, you know, after you've been through some crises, the most important thing is like, what are the facts, right? That's like, that is something that I've learned. But it was a really interesting time to live it real time, try to communicate just what was important, be in touch with the right emergency departments, be available to the news, communicate all this stuff, and then deal with the reputation management of people being like, well, UCLA, you're so inept. You flooded all these cars. The water, I don't want to get these stats wrong. It's been a long time, but the water moves so fast that elevators many, many, many feet away were blown out. The doors blew out. It was so much water moving so fast, and it filled up parking lots and flooded people's cars. And I brought up this story at a fires panel recently, and the guy was like, Poly Pavilion. Like, he knew that the basketball stadium floor had just been finished. Like, for the first, like, it had just been renovated. It was this big deal. I was in the UCLA marching band. I performed at the new floor going in as a student, and the floor got flooded. And it was, that was like a big deal. The stadium had just been whatever. So I sort of dealt with that, 10, 15 years ago as an institution, A, just trying to help people live, and then B, watching the community point all of these totally wrong fingers at the wrong institution when in fact we were a victim, right? And like Poly, we had to fix our stadium no matter what, or our arena rather, even though the campus would not get money back for it for a long, long time for something they didn't do. And they had to deal with people being mad at campus. LA, it is thought that the really big, really bad fire was started by a utility company. It is pretty well proven, but allegedly, which is a big, bad deal. It's not the first time in California that people have died because utilities didn't manage their infrastructure. And so I'm witnessing this same circle happening where people are blaming the fire department when there are other people to blame. And I'll say like one other example of emotions getting out of hand is that we had a tech company that it was an education technology company, and they had keywords that they blocked. And people get really testy about keywords that get blocked, right? And like, we work in social, we work in marketing. When people have a perception that a keyword is being treated differently, they will sort of invent conspiracies around what does and doesn't happen associated with that keyword. And so our program was available to school students. And so there was a lot of words and a lot of spellings, a way that school students would try to be school students and try to cuss or try to talk about illicit substances or act or whatever. And so there's all these like sort of totally like you would have no idea that this existed. But essentially, our database cross-referenced Urban Dictionary for obvious reasons to reduce slang sneaking into educational content. Somebody searched this incredibly obscure thing, which was also slang for something bad. And they accused our client of being anti-trans as a result. And immediately, like I saw this accusation and didn't think anything of it because we're like, we get this all the time. Like, oh, you don't let me say this, you don't let me say that. And we have a sort of way that we talk about it. And then this person claimed that they had called our client and the client said, yeah, you can't say that word. And immediately I looked at that and I was like, that's crazy that this tweet about this like phone call with this company happened because we don't have a number. But there was a screenshot of a customer service conversation. So immediately, thankfully, because I've been through all of this, I just went to what are the facts? And I got in touch with customer service. Did this conversation happen? Was there a phone call? I thought phones didn't exist, whatever. Okay, like I told a VP really quickly, like, hey, this thing is happening. I'm chasing down the information, but I'll put you in. And in this situation, they actually had a person to person. So a leader of the company called the person who had the nasty tweet that led to the conspiracy theory, that led to this, that led to that. And I was really surprised actually that like a vice president of this company personally called an angry, lying tweeter and had a conversation and said like, hey, like this is what's going on. And what's going on is middle schoolers. And the thing that you typed into the search is very easily findable as something that's also a very naughty string of words. And every other iteration of this word is totally fine. But, thank you for your concern, fellow citizen. So yeah, we're very crisis aware and, it's important and it can be as simple as someone having a conspiracy about a company up to life and death, like who killed my aunt, right? And so it matters and it's observable in so many contexts. And I do think a lot of companies benefit from people thinking through their communications because the way that any of those organizations respond can really affect someone deeply and how they think about the world and how they think about how the world treats them.
It seems to me that even when a crisis has passed, and maybe even when someone who had a complaint or ran into an issue, when their issue has been addressed or their complaint has been resolved, that because of a bit of human nature, but I think also feed algorithms, that you must deal with challenges around this idea that UCLA is at fault or that the firefighters are at fault, because there is something about, again, human nature, but also some of these feed algorithms that create and sustain echo chambers. And so do you get involved with your clients in discussions about maybe there are some communities that you're never going to convince them that the phone call didn't happen? And is there anything that your client should do about things like this? Or no, you have a certain budget and your best efforts are focused in one place. Don't bother with the echo chambers, maybe.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it really makes a difference in our context as an agency because we do have a cap on hours. When I had the letters UCLA or CBS under my purview, it all felt like my purview. And so I needed to know absolutely everything that was going on with them and then have knowledge of it and B, have a plan about how to deal with it. Something interesting about UCLA that time was that like one of the things I didn't expect is how many threats to the life of researchers I would see. There were bombs put on professors' cars who did what people thought of as unethical animal research and lots of other accusations. So like real threats on people's lives. And that has to have like a whole workflow, right? Because there's trolls and then there's a campus of 60,000 people per day where shootings have happened from angry PhD students, right? And so, yeah, there's a different level of the amount of involvement and tracking. There's this other world now, where we have a set of hours and there's only so much we can do. And we will advise on how we believe our time is best spent based on their organization's goals. And they will say, well, this matters to me or this matters to leadership or whatever, and we'll meet in the middle. And so there's definitely times when we just sort of step away from audiences. So a big part of our company is women in technology, supporting women in technology, supporting women who invest in women in technology. And that world is rife with haters, to say the least. And however, we work with a lot of data-based organizations. And so if somebody makes a claim, if we make a claim and somebody makes a counterclaim, as a data-based organization, it is up to us to respond. Like it's about having a conversation. And so determining if somebody has a real question versus if they're there to fight is a big part of every brand's time. And there's the echo chamber challenge these days is that, you don't want to add any fuel to the fire. But if it's an organization that says that it stands up for conversation and dialogue, like we want to reflect that in the brand's communications. And so we sort of have like a workflow of how we deal with that. And for the organizations that have this sort of like activist stance or like data stance. And we're pretty good at figuring out if someone's actually there to ask something. And if you're willing to be an organization that does provide information, and if somebody is actually curious, which is not always the case, you can have a big impact. Like there is the flip side of having real dialogue and answering real questions that people have about something. Overall, the echo chamber thing is tough for me. Do you remember when there were all of these articles that were saying that YouTube was radicalizing people?
Oh, yeah.
That was like a big moment. And they found later that all of the people that were radicalized probably would have been anyway. That it wasn't YouTube sending you down an algorithmic path. It was as much their own searches, their own interests, and that there were other parts of their lives and their character that matched with being radicalized, e.g., like this was like people joining ISIS and stuff. This was like that era. And so algorithms are certainly a mirror. And so I try to remember that for some people, they were going to get access to whatever information they're finding online. They were going to get it anyway, somehow, some way. But also to not downplay that algorithms reward rage. It rewards high emotion. And that, choosing if we want to engage in that or not as a brand, be it as little as a comment or as big as an incendiary post, is a decision. And it comes back down to what we were talking about, which is like mission and audience. What are we trying to do here? And is it going to communicate what we want it to the audience? And sometimes making people mad is the point. Like, we're working with organizations that want to get important information out in the world. And so sometimes rage is helpful to us, to our brands. But most of the time, with your classic institutional or tech company or something, we're not trying to do that. But there are pros and cons. People will be people. Just do your best.
I have not thought about this in, I don't know how long. It could have been a decade. But one thing you reminded me of was in maybe 2008, 2010, I don't recall exactly, the Air Force put out a decision tree of sorts. And I forget the exact name. I will put it in the show notes, though, when I find it. it was something along the lines of online response assessment or something like that. And then years later, I think they put out a version 2. You may very well have come across this. Maybe there are other versions. I'm sure other organizations have developed these as well, because it sounds like whether you have your own decision tree documented, that you and or your organization certainly have this decision tree playing out in your head. And I recall one of the things on there was, let's pick a situation. Someone says something negative about the Air Force on some forum. And one of the questions was something along the lines of, well, is this a website or a space that we can tell is already set against us? So this person, there are various questions on this thing, and I forget all of them, but there are things like, does it seem like this person could be talked to, could have a reasonable conversation, would be open to talking to us? Does it seem like, based on their history of posting, that they have an axe to grind and all that? But then one of them is, even if the person could be reasoned with and so on, is this a bad neighborhood for us, more or less? And we don't want to wade into that at all. And you just reminded me that, I think there are a lot of questions right now. Maybe I shouldn't even say it as questions. Maybe it's been decided, probably has been decided, about certain social media channels are supposedly free speech zones or not. And that, X has certainly drifted to, as I see it, broadly a certain type of audience. And so when someone on X, or a community on X, and I don't mean to pick that out specifically, it's just a really easy example as of right now, at least in my mind, when someone has decided that they hate your client, I'm guessing that there are some really tough decisions that have to be made about, do we even get involved in that space? How many people are on X and are being influenced by negative things that are being said about us, that could be convinced that they're wrong, or they're believing the wrong things, or whatever it is. And yet maybe that's just a bad neighborhood for my client to wade into, to walk into at all.
I definitely want to see this decision tree, but absolutely, exactly. Like, we've documented a number of them, and it's actually, we usually don't document it formally client facing unless it's requested, because it's actually intensely difficult. And it's a great reminder of just how complex our work really is. We had a client, who asked, and it was 3 pages by the time I finished it, because this work is so complex. And depending on if you're coming, like I mentioned, from an institutional perspective or a data perspective, but even now, any company, engages differently. I think another, definitely X, oh my goodness, but even Reddit, I think is kind of the classic, it is a gold mine of information about your audience. It not even necessarily saying your name as a brand, but understanding how people really feel about a topic, about a product, about a region, about a problem. There's so much real talk happening on Reddit, but also has always been full of landmines, right? And same story where, do you even have a presence there? Do you even share that you have one there? And we're in such an interesting time, because when I got started in brand marketing on social, people just kind of saw a post from a brand as coming from a big brand. There was this sort of, and now there's this understanding that there's a person, and there's all this content where people are aware that there's a person behind that account. And I think the classic meme is somebody promote the intern who made this, right? That's the classic thing that grinds social media managers' gears, because it's dude, I've been doing this for 15 years. I'm tired. I'm not an intern. I had to do a 3-page decision tree just to comment on your post. And and so there's this whole understanding from the audience that there's a person on the other side of that screen. And then B, people now take brand responses more seriously. So it's not just you talking to one other person like you're talking about in a neighborhood. Everybody else in that neighborhood is watching what you say, and they're going to remember it, and they get to jump in on that conversation too. And with that, like, kind of brand crisis that I talked about earlier, with the key word making people angry, we knew that we had to respond publicly because so many people were jumping on this conspiracy bandwagon so quickly that they needed an official statement from us. Even though we were having a private conversation with them, we needed to publicly say, like, put our stance out there. And what was really helpful is that our stance was, hey, go do this test yourself. Here is a direct link for you to do this test yourself, where you will see that this hypothesis that you've put out in the world is wrong. And so people could immediately answer their question that this conspiracy did not hold up. It didn't hold any water. So we put it out there like, hey, here's the facts. Click on this link. Also, we've DM'd you. We'd love to talk to you more, right? Straightforward. But it wasn't even about talking to her. We already were talking to that person. It was about talking to everybody else, observing how we were responding. And I love the neighborhood metaphor because it is a big decision. And I think a lot of brands, probably wisely, are just avoiding entering altogether. But there can be a lot of healing and a lot of greater crisis prevention if you can handle those small fires early.
So I've asked you a lot about crises, and there's so many positive things about social media. Yes, there are plenty of negative things, but there are people who are 90 years old today that had no connections to the people that they went to high school with, or maybe they moved overseas. And, I remember in the 90s, I had a friend from South Korea, and to call back home, it was like $1 a minute, or it could have been $10 a minute for all I know, and so there are people who, I'm going to keep going with the 90-year-olds just to narrow it down. There are people who graduated from high school over 70 years ago. And in the last 5, 10, 15 years, they have gotten reconnected to some of that community. I bet you it makes a lot of people feel good that if it's, grandma or great grandma who is 90 years old, to see periodically on Facebook or wherever it is, if grandma's 90, she's probably on Facebook. And it probably makes her feel good whether she's talking to someone or not, or interacting, to see her friends' grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and to even know that that person's still around or whatever. And that's just one example. There are communications opportunities, there are any number of things. And so, yes, plenty of negative things, but I've asked you a lot about that. And so I wanted to pivot toward, you said earlier in our conversation that celebrity or something like that was sort of a new thing. And I was thinking about, after you said that, I was thinking about communicating values and communicating culture of an organization, or a culture that an organization might aspire to. And so I don't know if you get involved in this or not. And if you do, I would love to hear about it. But, what might a CEO or an executive team do with their own social media to demonstrate to their staff and to their audience, this is who we are, this is what we stand for, and, express values and express what they're trying to do in the world?
Yeah. Executive marketing is kind of where that falls, and it's something that we love doing. I'll respond to your earlier statement. I started out by saying that I'm a military kid, and that's actually what I perceive as a huge part of my story about why I believed in social media to begin with, is that I was able to reconnect with people from all of the many states that I had lived in. And I personally had lived the power of social media and continue to, because I'm connected to people from all over the world. I remember the day I opened my paper address book and started looking people up on AIM and on Facebook, and actually starting to find some of these people that I had lost connection with throughout my life. And so I'm definitely one of those people that very early experienced what online connection meant. And I do think it's a huge reason why I stayed in what I did and why I would advocate for it in other contexts. So I agree. I think social media has a lot to give. And essentially what the research that's coming out about people's relationship with social media is pretty straightforward. It's socialize, don't scroll. So if you use social media to look at what your friends are doing, to talk to them, to organize getting together, to share what's going on with your life, you tend to leave having a good experience with social media. And if you use it to just scroll, just look at other people's lives, the classic highlight reel of someone else's life, then you will have a negative experience with social media. And it's like, that's pretty clear cut. And so, yeah, it's really just about the way that you engage. I always tell people that you build your own algorithm. It's a mirror. People are so algorithm aware now that they know how to they know what gets optimized. So teach it what you want it to optimize. I personally don't have a bad experience on any platform I go to. I don't see any of this trash because I have personalized the platform for myself, and I don't reward content that makes me angry. And so therefore I don't leave angry or depressed or whatever, because I've curated it. Because as much as we are not in control, we are in control. The platform wants you to be there. It wants you to have a good time. So yeah, I wanted to call that out because I do really still see it as incredibly valuable. And I happen to have the luxury of knowing how it works. So I also can curate my experience. In terms of executives, we do this work. We love it. We love working with leaders. And it doesn't even necessarily have to be the number one leader. It can be the number 2 or the number 5, or really anyone who's willing to be an ambassador. In the era of LinkedIn doing so well, individual ambassadors for a brand is so good. It's LinkedIn, like anybody can scroll their LinkedIn right now and can probably scroll 10 posts before they actually see a brand's post come through. Specifically, it's all people, right? Whereas like on Instagram, you can probably see a brand pretty quickly because it's given a much bigger slice of the algorithm pie. And so in an era where LinkedIn, which is a people-first platform, is doing so well, having a person tell the organization's story is so, so key. And so it's something that we've pushed all of our clients to do, from activating just employees in general for employee engagement, all the way up to C-suite communications. I always recommend people enter with caution. They have to be willing. They have to be available enough. And you have to have a conversation about vulnerability, because the moment that you open this person up as an ambassador, especially if it's a more traditional organization, it's a two-way street. That's what was so magical about social media, is that it's not a billboard. You can't scream at a billboard and actually be heard by the organization making it, but you can scream at a CEO's LinkedIn comments, and that will actually be heard and seen by the community, like we were talking about. I absolutely advocate for it. I think do it smartly. If you have someone who's already naturally an ambassador for the organization, the person that already likes to go to the events, the person that is already the person that you bring to the board meeting to present the new idea, whoever, they tend to be a good match for representation. And from there, as much as you can make it natural, the better. So if this person's already loves the organization, already represents the values, be it, we have a hospital client where the person's already very healthy. They already get out and about in the world. They already socialize with the staff a lot. They already shake hands of patients a lot because that's who they already were. Just put that online, right? And ideally, when working with executives, I always ask, if you are sending an article to your coworker or to your team, include us in that email, because the one line, hey, I thought the notes about patient satisfaction in NICU units were really interesting in this article. that's a phenomenal post. It sounds like you. It is you. And so, yeah, as much as you can take someone who's organically already represents the organization and just get that up after having had that vulnerability conversation so that they know what they're in for, it's lucrative. It's so much more valuable in terms of hours than an ad campaign, than a viral video. It's just, I'm pushing everybody to do it, but also with caution and awareness that executive visibility has pros and cons.
I appreciate that you said, it doesn't necessarily have to be that top leader. It can be the number 2 or whatever it is. But thanks to social media, you can communicate not just who that person is, but hopefully the values and the culture of the organization. And so if you have a client that is willing to share, and if they're not going to post it, if they'll at least allow you to post it, that provides something that is more concrete than me just making an assumption about who this person is. And so do you get involved much in executive visibility?
Yeah. And, I'll throw out an extra piece to that. It goes back to that holistic perspective of our work. There's a perception now that social media is easy work that anybody can do. And, I have just been grinding, that. Like, I've just been doing the work that for a while I hadn't seen this whole world of dudes on mics, like saying, I make $30,000 in passive income by having an agency. And it's been really funny because a lot of young people, and a lot of young men in particular that I have met recently, buy into it. And it's a scam, right? It's a coaching, like kind of MLM scam for the vast majority of these creators. But you and I were talking about holistic marketing. And sometimes I feel like by being in social media, I'm in this industry where there are just straight up scammers because they think it's easy. It's a little harder to scam as a dentist. And so there's fewer people like that. And when you and I were talking about this, holistic work that we do, where we really do think about an organization's entire goal when we are working with you, there are other people that are there to scam you out of money. They're trying to just get a margin. And so they're really not going to think about you as an organization. And what I love to do is to sit with someone's mission, sit with someone's work, and really try to think holistically about it. And I'm on a journey of telling people that story because referrals, until recently, we were a 100% referral-based company. Referrals tell that story. Like a VP to a VP will say, hey, we work with this great agency. Like they think so much bigger than just getting a post out. I start with this rant because the people that interact with social media, a huge fan base, that first degree connection is staff. And so for a company, it's so easy for people to forget that the first person to like that post, it's always staff, right? It's always someone. And it's maybe it's not marketing staff, but it's a team member. So I mentioned the hospital, right? So we did a project recently with a hospital, and I told them like, hey, there's a really big partnership. You should tell your staff that you're going to post about it. You should tell them about it, and that it would mean a lot to you to get the word out. And they hadn't thought about it because essentially the nurse at this hospital was going to find out maybe if she happens to follow the Instagram about this partnership. But instead, as part of the company, it's like, hey, we have this massive partnership happening, and a way to make it even bigger is for you to be a part of it. That's employee engagement. That's HR. And the social media and marketing is like barely waking up to this as part of it. So, but like over the past few years, there have been a lot of software improvements in the realm of employee engagement. So like Sprout Social, I'm pretty sure they bought their employee engagement platform. And I'm getting a bunch of emails because I went to a conference last year and met with some of them where they're like, hey, like schedule your time for this employee engagement talk. It's becoming a lucrative part of marketing because people are starting to put it together. But this, this sort of thinking of, hey, your staff is going to be excited about this. Like you can actually make them a part of this. there's two ways to think about it. Like some people will say, they'll come from this perspective that their staff should just be posting about their company all the time. It's this kind of like using them as a resource. Whereas the perspective I try to give people is, when are people going to be excited and proud to work here? That's the post that they're naturally going to share anyway. We already know that statistically. And just like as a person, they're going to be excited that we're partnering with XYZ famous astronaut, XYZ famous soccer team, XYZ famous whoever, like Olympian, just pulling from recent examples. That's when you ask them, when it's an easy ask, and when they're naturally going to be like, yeah, I'm proud of that. Like, I'm so proud to work at this company. So I wanted to call that out because it's just yet another way as a social media team, instead of just flipping that switch of send an email to all employees about anything that we care about as a marketing team. Who cares? You're not going to get results. Flip the switch of when are we going to be proud? Like, when are people going to be proud to work here, and how can we activate them in that time? That's being a person. And the other thing about it is that is doing work for technically the HR team, for managers, for feeding just that little extra point of pride. Like, yeah, I'm proud to work here, because then they get people engaging with their posts like, oh my God, that's so cool. You're so lucky that you work there. Or hook me up with some tickets, or get me a signature, or whatever people say. That work goes so much further. And it just takes like thinking holistically from the team. And so I can't tell you how many conversations I've had where I say like, hey, like, use this sparingly, like 4 to 6 times a year, but this might be a good chance to activate. And you better believe department heads look good, and there's just kind of, you can't measure employee satisfaction because of pride, but you add to that little bucket of employee satisfaction. And that's part of being a team and part of being a company. And it's bigger than a tweet. And that sounds cheesy, but that's the kind of thing that we try to consult with people on, and we see results, So we know it works. Yeah. I remember like somebody was IPOing, or they were going on a stock exchange, and we pitched like, let's get the company involved. And the company they got to HR, and the company ended up mailing everybody bells. And then we did like a big like Zoom where everybody rang bells on a camera, and like people still take pictures of their bell. And that's good. It's like a good thing in so many ways. There's pride, there's memory, there's content. There's so many good things that come from it. So yes, I'm so pro employee engagement and executive engagement. But, this is a weird year for executives because of a certain healthcare executive. And so I tried to tell people like, it's a journey. And in risk averse Mandy land, I try to remind people that, we should go in committing to it for a while, and go in having had great conversations with everybody involved, because another person is another potential crisis, rather than just the big brand. Like, when there's a person, things change.
It really helped me that you categorize that into HR, and then also you using the phrase employee engagement. One, because it helped me understand not just where some of this activity could sit, but also it helps me better conceptualize of the impact that an executive or an executive team could have on employees and morale.
LinkedIn is so interesting because, yeah, they could be so much bigger, but they have maintained growth. They have a TikTok style video feed. And I keep reminding people of that vertical video on LinkedIn is a whole world now. Fascinating. Yeah, this employee engagement. So one of the really challenging things person to person is that the API is so closed that doing competition research on exact people is incredibly difficult. And a meeting I had last year, they claimed that they had the only person to person competition dashboard on the market. I don't know if that's true, but I had never seen it before, because up to that point, we were doing DIY research. Here are other healthcare executives. Here are other education technology executives. Here are other female venture capitalists that have a presence on LinkedIn. Like we were back like down and dirty in the Excel spreadsheets of like noting people, like noting their sort of engagement rates, but there was no aggregation platform. And certainly things like a Sprout Social, they can do pages, but they couldn't do people because of the API. And so it still is kind of the Wild West, but these engagement platforms, so like I know Sprouts, what they do is they have staff plug their social into the employee engagement platform. And then it's really nifty because you can just send out an email and an employee can just click like post, like from the email, because everything's plugged in, it'll just go in. Or they can click post and they can go edit it. And you can do this for your executive. So things are pre-written and can be posted. And then you can do it for staff. And of course, the beauty is that because a staff member has actually plugged their socials into the employee engagement platform, you get all their data. They're notoriously guarded about their API. And I don't know if that's keeping our data close to ourselves, or we just haven't bothered to invest in making it easier for other people to interact with our platform. But it's always been a pain, whereas like X/Twitter had such a wide open API that you could manipulate it and like learn so much about people so easily all the time. So it's a massive opportunity. And it's something that we also try to communicate with people, where if you have someone who's trying to build up their thought leadership, being a part of that can be really lucrative for the company. And then we have the conversation of the moment that somebody becomes your ambassador, you're married to them for life, right? So like if that person goes rogue or does something, it's just like choosing an influencer, but even more intimate because they are on your payroll. And so we always have that conversation, and it's a two-way street for that ambassador. If something happens with this brand, just know that you will be forever associated with them. And so just make sure that you think about that. Make sure that you have a conversation about rights, about longevity. I think especially in this sort of like work and institutional context, we've had a lot of, and people are always so surprised that we're saying like, get your releases, like make sure you have an agreement, make sure you have an understanding. People just want the content up. And I come back to that, all of my work history and maybe being the curmudgeon in the room who has been on the other side of someone who left a company and no longer wants their face on the channels, and finding out that there wasn't an agreement, so they're perfectly in their right, or there was an agreement and we need to have a conversation about that and how we want to proceed. So 100% take advantage of it. Like, see it as an opportunity to build your own staff up as people, as thought leaders if they want to. Yeah, but also proceed with caution.
It feels intuitive to me that LinkedIn is a place that should be valuable for plenty of us to spend time. One reason that I like being connected to you, Mandy, is because I don't know how often you post, but I see that you share a lot about jobs. So I'm sure a lot of people appreciate that. And then also now and then you will comment on some sort of marketing, often social media, but usually your comment is a question rather than a statement. And I tend to appreciate that because you don't put out there, you don't ask me necessarily to believe whatever you believe about the situation. You're often just saying something like, here's this social media campaign, or here's this thing that I saw. What did they think when they developed this product? Or what was the approval process like when this campaign rolled out? And you often draw my attention to things that I'm just not seeing anywhere else. So if someone's listening to this, I certainly would recommend that you look up Mandy, because at least for me, as I said, I appreciate seeing what you post.
Oh, thank you. That's great feedback. For our executive comms, I'm always telling people, catch the magic that's already happening in the room. And quite literally just hearing myself, because this is how I'm talking to people. One of my best posts last year was I was doing some tech comparables research, competition research, and I went to Apple on LinkedIn and they didn't have any posts. And I was like, whoa, of course Apple can do this. They're Apple. They're just like, you know what? We're just never going to post ever on LinkedIn. Like, do we need to? No. You know who you're working for. You know who we are. And I was just like, wow, what a flex. And that's exactly what I wrote. And it did so well. And that is like, it's not content, right? But it's just me. Like, I think I was maybe in a virtual room, like with my team, like just kind of poking around and being like, well, what's Apple up to, you know? And I was like, wow, like, I was so blown away by it. And people also loved it. And so thank you. It's great feedback. Like, I really try to reflect who I am online, and I am curious. Yeah. And I just want to learn. I love this Brene Brown statement. I don't want to be right. I want to get it right. And so I want to be collaborative. I want to hear what people think. I want to be wrong. And so I do love LinkedIn, and I need to practice what I preach. And so I'm glad that my style thus far has cut through, and I will take that learning with me in future posts. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Now, I just looked at the clock and did not realize that I had kept you so long. So I know we are going to have to wrap up, whether you're going to those calls right now or in a little bit. You know, I've kept you for quite a while. So is there anything that you want to call out, you know, things that you want to bring people's attention to before we wrap up?
You know, if you know someone who wants that in-depth social media that we do, let me know. If you figure out a way to tell the world that, let me know. And of course, Social Media Club, we're a completely volunteer run. And so if you want to come be part of the magic, come join. I posted about it on LinkedIn fairly often.
Well, so we've mentioned LinkedIn already, and I will have links in the show notes. Is there anywhere else that people should go to follow you, reach out to you, or otherwise check you out?
I'm in pretty much most places people are, from Blue Sky to Threads to Instagram, etc. And I'm Media Mandy, all of those places, MEDIAMANDY.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining me, Mandy. I really appreciate it. This has been a great conversation, and I hope that anyone that listened to this has also found it valuable. So thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, thank you for listening. I hope you got a lot out of today's conversation. If you enjoyed the episode, please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe. And please share it with someone you know who'd appreciate this kind of information. If you want to bring this kind of thinking to your own business, check out mine at inboundandagile.com. We specialize in helping leaders with challenges around marketing, communications, and leadership so they can inspire real action in their people and audiences. Thanks again for listening, and I hope you'll come back for future episodes.